Welcome to my channel, Sella Buzz. At 67, Ava Gardner finally talks about Humphrey Bogart. Ava Gardner was born on December 24, 1922 in Grabtown, a tiny place in North Carolina. She grew up in a poor working family. Her early life was hard because her family didn't have much money during the Great Depression in the South. Her mom and dad were poor tobacco farmers, and Ava was the youngest of 7 kids. Even though her family had money problems and life was tough when she was young, she had natural beauty that would later make her famous on movie screens. Her Southern roots stayed with her forever and made her who she was. This gave her a special mix of class and being real that people loved. Ava got into Hollywood because of luck, perfect timing, and real talent. Movie scouts from MGM found her in the early 1940s. They loved not just her amazing looks, her bright green eyes, blonde hair, and perfect face, but also the strong personality that shined from her. Gardner's early movie career started with small parts that slowly showed how good she could act. But it was her big break in movies like The Killers in 1946 that made everyone know she was a serious actress. Her acting of complicated women who weren't always good or bad showed she had real talent that was more than just being pretty. This let her play many different kinds of roles, some where she was tempting, some where she was weak, and some where she was strong and independent. Ava Gardner's career was full of working with some of the best directors and actors of her time, like John Huston, Humphrey Bogart, and Burt Lancaster. She worked really hard to get better at acting. She often brought raw feelings to her characters that made audiences and movie critics really care about them. Famous movies like Moambo in 1953, which got her nominated for an Academy Award, Showboat in 1951, and On the Beach in 1959, showed how good she was and why people still loved her. Her acting often showed themes of love, losing someone, and being strong. This showed not just her acting skills, but also how well she understood people's feelings. Right after Ava Gardner came to Los Angeles and started working for MGM, she quickly met one of the studio's biggest young stars, Mickey Rooney. Back then, Rooney was super famous. All of America loved him for playing the good kid Andy Hardy in really popular movies. The two fell in love really fast. Even though Gardner came from a small town and didn't know much about Hollywood's crazy lifestyle, she fell for Rooney's charm, humor, and high energy. Their love story moved super quick, and they got married on January 10, 1942, when Gardner was only 19 years old. They had their wedding in the tiny town of Ballard, California, far away from the bright lights of Los Angeles. This wasn't just for privacy. It was planned by MGM studio boss Louis B. Mayer. Mayer was scared that if people knew Rooney was married, it might hurt the carefully planned public image of Andy Hardy, the perfect American boy next door. Mayer worried that if fans knew Rooney was married, especially to a beautiful young woman like Gardner, his fans, especially young girls who loved him, would stop liking the single, wholesome character that made him so popular at the movies. Sadly, the marriage fell apart almost as fast as it started. Gardner found out that behind Rooney's boyish charm was a darker side full of heavy gambling and cheating on her with other women. Even though Rooney seemed innocent in public, in private, he lived wild. He went to late-night parties, had affairs, and spent money without thinking. Gardner was still getting used to Hollywood life and was heartbroken by how he acted. By 1943, barely 1 year into marriage, she asked for a divorce, saying mental cruelty was the official reason. But privately, she said the marriage ended because of Rooney's gambling problem and his constant cheating. Even though this hurt her badly, Gardner was careful not to ruin Rooney's image in the newspapers. She didn't tell the public about his bad behavior, so his beloved Andy Hardy character stayed perfect for his adoring fans. The press and the studio kept Rooney's good guy image, and Gardner quietly walked away. Her first Hollywood marriage taught her a hard lesson about the truth behind the fancy world of fame. Gardner's second marriage happened just a couple years later. This time she married jazz musician and bandleader Artie Shaw, one of the most famous people in the swing music era. Shaw had been married before to movie star Lana Turner. He was known for his amazing musical talent, but also for being difficult and bossy. Gardner, still in her early 20s, got caught up in Shaw's sophisticated world of music and smart thinking. But their marriage quickly became troubled. Shaw reportedly wanted Gardner to change herself to meet his high standards. He often criticized her education and background. He was a perfectionist, not just with his music, but with his relationships too. Gardner soon couldn't stand his talking down to her. Their marriage lasted from 1945 to 1946 and was short and stormy. This left Gardner feeling disappointed again about finding lasting love. But it was her third marriage that became the most important and lasting part of her love life. In 1951, Ava Gardner married singer and actor Frank Sinatra, a man who was as famous as she was. Sinatra had left his first wife, Nancy Barbato, to be with Gardner. Their marriage caused a media frenzy. Newspaper headlines screamed about the scandal of Sinatra leaving his family for the glamorous movie star. The public became fascinated with their romance, and it only grew over time. Gardner herself later wrote in her autobiography that Sinatra was the great love of her life. Their relationship was passionate, magnetic, and very complicated. It was marked by both intense love and destructive fights. The Gardner-Sinatra marriage was as fiery as it was famous. Both stars were stubborn, fiercely independent, and living under the constant watching eyes of the press. Their marriage was troubled by jealousy, explosive arguments, and making up that was as passionate as their fights. During their time together, Gardner became pregnant twice, but she chose to end both pregnancies. In her autobiography, published 8 months after her death, she explained that MGM had strict contract rules that punished female stars for having children. The studio was afraid motherhood would interfere with a star's availability and make her less marketable. Gardner felt trapped by those pressures. Her decisions showed the difficult position women in Hollywood often faced, forced to put careers over personal lives because of the control the studios had over them. By 1954, the constant fighting was too much and Gardner filed for divorce. But their legal separation took a long time, and the divorce wasn't finalized until 1957. Even though their marriage ended, the bond between Gardner and Sinatra never truly broke. In fact, after the divorce, they managed to turn their stormy romance into a lasting friendship. Gardner always spoke of Sinatra with love, calling him the love of her life. Sinatra continued to support and care for her. Their connection lasted long after the passion had cooled, and they stayed close until Gardner's death in 1990. Their relationship, both during and after marriage, became one of Hollywood's most legendary love stories. People remembered it for its intensity, drama, and lasting emotional depth. By the time Ava Gardner reached age 67, she had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. She had been a dazzling MGM starlet, a global screen icon, a Hollywood scandal maker, a 3-time wife, a jet-setting adventurer, and in her later years, a woman thinking about her place in cinema's golden age. Throughout her career, Gardner had worked with many of Hollywood's most famous leading men: Clark Gable, Gregory Peck, Burt Lancaster, and Frank Sinatra, who became one of the great loves of her life. Yet for decades, one person from her past loomed large. Others often mentioned him, but Ava herself rarely spoke of him in detail: Humphrey Bogart. By the time Gardner entered the Hollywood spotlight, Bogart was already a fully established star. He had changed himself from a character actor in gangster roles to one of the most iconic leading men of the 1940s, thanks to Casablanca in 1942 and The Maltese Falcon in 1941. He had a reputation for being tough, cynical, and coolly detached, but those who knew him well also described a man of sharp wit, surprising sensitivity, and deep loyalty to his friends. Gardner was cautious about commenting on him publicly, partly out of respect, partly because of the complicated politics of Hollywood, and partly because she disliked feeding the gossip mills that swirled around her. But in her late 60s, long after Bogart's death in 1957, Gardner finally allowed herself to speak more openly. Sitting in her London apartment in a thoughtful mood, she said with a wistful half-smile, "Bogart was one of a kind. He wasn't just the tough guy the movies made him out to be. He was sharp, funny, and he had this way of making you feel like you were in on the joke with him. I always admired that about him." She paused before continuing, talking about the difference between Bogart's screen character and the man she had known off camera. People forget that Bogey wasn't a big man physically. He wasn't tall or handsome in the way Cary Grant was. But the moment he walked into a room, the atmosphere changed. He had presence. Pure magnetism. You couldn't take your eyes off him. That's something you can't fake. Not in real life. Not on screen. Gardner, who had often been unfairly dismissed, in her early years as simply a beautiful face, felt a kind of connection with Bogart in the way Hollywood underestimated them both at first. She thought back. He had to fight to prove himself just as I did. People thought I was just another pretty girl MGM had picked up, and for a while they were right. I didn't know the first thing about acting, but Bogey understood that struggle, that need to show you were more than the labels they stuck on you. When asked about their personal interactions, Gardner was careful but still warm in her memories. She remembered nights out when Bogart and his wife Lauren Bacall entertained friends. She, often part of the Hollywood circle that orbited Sinatra, found herself in Bogart's company. Bogey was protective of the people he cared about. He and Frank were close, and through Frank I got to know him better. He could drink anyone under the table, but even when he was 3 sheets to the wind, he still had that twinkle in his eye. He had a way of making you feel seen, even if the whole room was clamoring for his attention. As she grew older, Gardner began to feel a kind of nostalgia for the era Bogart represented, an era that was already fading by the 1950s. When I think about Bogey, I think about the end of a certain Hollywood. He was part of the last generation that didn't give a damn about polish. He smoked, he drank, he said what he thought. The studios couldn't manufacture another Bogart if they tried. Believe me, they tried with a dozen other men, but it never worked. He was the real thing. Her tone turned softer as she acknowledged his personal struggles. He wasn't perfect. He had his demons like all of us did. He could be moody, stubborn, sometimes difficult. But that's what made him human. That's what made him Bogart. And I suppose that's why even now, all these years later, people still can't let him go. He left something behind that's untouchable. By speaking openly about Bogart at 67, Ava Gardner was not only offering a rare glimpse into the private world of one of Hollywood's greatest stars, but also in a way reflecting on her own mortality and legacy. In describing Bogart's authenticity, his magnetism, and his humanity, she was also affirming the values she herself cherished most: the refusal to be reduced to an image, the struggle to be taken seriously, and the enduring power of personality over time. In closing her thoughts that afternoon, Gardner sighed gently, her voice filled with both admiration and sadness. I don't think there will ever be another Bogey. He belonged to his time, and yet, he somehow belongs to all time. If you ask me, that's the best any of us can hope for, to be remembered the way he is, and he deserves every bit of it. In 1986, Ava Gardner's glamorous yet turbulent life was shaken when she suffered a devastating stroke. The once vibrant actress, renowned for her radiant beauty and powerful screen presence, suddenly found herself facing the fragility of health. Though she had saved enough money to cover her medical expenses, an extraordinary gesture of devotion came from none other than Frank Sinatra, the man who had once been the great love of her life. Sinatra, who had never stopped caring for Ava despite their fiery and stormy past, insisted on taking care of her treatment. He arranged for her to travel in comfort and safety, hiring a medically staffed private plane to bring her to a specialist in the United States. For Ava, who was known for her fierce independence and pride, allowing Sinatra to step in was a remarkable acknowledgement of the enduring bond they shared, a bond that time and distance had never truly broken. Despite such efforts, her health continued to get worse in the years that followed. On January 25, 1990, the world lost one of its most dazzling stars when Ava Gardner passed away at the age of 67. The cause was bronchopneumonia, and she died quietly in Westminster, London, far from her North Carolina roots, but surrounded by the timeless aura of Hollywood legend that had never faded. Her death sent ripples across the entertainment industry, with admirers remembering not only her unforgettable performances in classics like The Killers, Moambo, and The Barefoot Contessa, but also the untamed spirit that had made her one of cinema's most iconic women. 4 days later, on January 29th, Ava Gardner was brought home to Smithfield, North Carolina, where she was laid to rest in Sunset Memorial Park. There, beside her beloved siblings and her parents, Jonas and Molly Gardner, the small-town girl, who had risen to become one of the most glamorous stars in the world, found eternal peace. Her grave remains a site of quiet pilgrimage for fans who continue to honor her memory, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of admiration.